All right. All right. It's all you. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Dan. Again, good morning, everyone. So I thought what I would do is kind of give a bit of an overview of some of the things the division has been working on over the last year, and then get into some of the second part will be a little more of the activities, the oil and gas industry activities for 2021. And last year, I had kind of gone over like all the laws and all the areas the laws have impacted. So I didn't want to redo that again. But let's see here. Okay, there we go. But, you know, as a general overview, we do oversee most aspects of the oil and gas natural or industry in Ohio, including well pad construction, well permitting, well drilling and completions, production operations, waste disposal and handling, well plugging and well site reclamation. And a lot of you know this already, but pretty much for the first 100 years, the industry was unregulated. We were created in '65. And this is an example of what it looked like before we were created. It was unregulated. There was not spacing for acreage or distances. And literally you could see almost a dozen rigs. Basically everyone would put a rig almost on their property. And so there was a lot of waste. It wasn't conserving the resource. And that's pretty much, this picture led to the creation of the Division of Oil and Gas, which is probably long overdue.
Hey, Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're kind of seeing the presenter view. Instead of the slideshow, if you could.
Oh, okay. No,
change that.
thanks for letting me know, because I've got two screens going on here. So, okay. Where do I do that?
I think you just want to switch the screen you're sharing.
Yeah, you might have to stop share and reshare.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Mike can do that.
Here, let's see. So, wait. Or okay, maybe it's this one. Let me try this one.
There we go.
Is that full screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Much better.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry about the interruption.
Sure. No, you're on my laptop, but then I didn't realize there were actually two screens to work off of. So, okay. So, all right. So this is just where we've been. Yeah, thank you. Catching me there instead of waiting till the end. So just one thing that did happen in conjunction with the horizontal shale drilling in Ohio is Senate Bill 315, which that required a road use maintenance agreement, sampling of water wells within 1,500 feet, chemical disclosure, increased liability insurance in a larger amount. So those are some that we definitely had some of the laws that were directly related to horizontal shale drilling. And then some of the rules I'll just walk through real quickly, which has happened since the shale started, was this well construction rule. That's been updated, ensures better casing construction. It addressed some things specifically to shale wells, and then actually we're in the process. We've done that, and we have even another update in place on that one. This is the well pad construction, as it says, before 2015. Poor construction, lack of planning with unstable soils led to stability and safety issues, and we did have some pads collapse. We passed these rules in 2015, and since then there's been very few sites that have experienced issues, no safety issues at all. And then actually operators have reported implementing processes and procedures from our regulation in other states voluntarily. So what they've done in Ohio with our rules on well pad constructions has been so successful they're voluntarily taking it into the other states they work in. So that's a good thing. Simultaneous operations, which there's producing wells on a pad and they're in the process of drilling and completed new wells. So those rules passed in 2020. Those were the first rules governing simultaneous operations, or SIMOPS, in the country. It was a very inclusive rulemaking process with a lot of industry experts there. And these rules provide for safety requirements, it allows them to continue under certain circumstances to produce the well while they're drilling new wells. And you can see on the right, those are some examples of like the cages they put over the wellhead, and those cages are designed to take the impact if a rig would fall on top of them. So it keeps the wellhead from getting smashed. Let's see, okay, that's when they took effect, October 4th. Okay, I think that other one said 2020. It was I think we started in 2020. They took effect in October of 2021. And this is something that goes out with the permits. Just continues, a little more on SIMOPS. Spacing, we've talked about this before, but we did revise and update the spacing well rules in 2019. It did decrease the acreage amounts for conventional wells. It removed minimum distances between horizontal wells within the unit, not to the edges, but within the unit. The operator can space those horizontal well bores based on what they think is best for them. Really hasn't been many conventional permits. We might get 30 to 40 a year now. We didn't change the spacing, so the distances are still the same, but when you took that distance and did a radius of 300 feet, it was closer to a 10-acre unit than a 20-acre unit. So the units, which our law said are supposed to be compact, the acreage now kind of correlates to the distances. I do think, like Dale mentioned, the prices have increased a lot, and we are starting to see a few vertical permits being applied for, mostly in the oil areas. Same thing's true for horizontal wells. I just issued 3 yesterday in eastern Guernsey County, but that's an oil area. So I think with these prices, this is going to swing back a little bit more towards the wet area. We also had new plugging rules that went into effect, in 2020. Really a lot was done in those plugging rules. One thing that's really good from our perspective as a division is when they apply to get a plugging permit, with their application, they have to submit a plugging plan. So it's a detailed description of how they plan to plug the well. And then before we'll approve the permit, we push that plugging plan out to the inspector, and they review it to make sure it's correct. And a lot of times there's some back and forth between the inspector and the company. But the good thing is now when we issue a permit, there's a plugging plan in place that says, when, where, how the plugs must be placed during the operations. And it's causing the operator to have to think this through before they go out there. Before, they just show up with their plugging rig and look at the inspector and say, okay, how do you want me to plug this? And so we were being stuck in the middle of, they're looking to us, and it's real clear in the rules how it's supposed to be plugged. So this way, it's been good. People have to do their planning, And that also means, how much cement and just a lot of different things. Now they have this figured out. So that's one of the things that came out of the plugging rules. Class 2 disposal wells and oil and gas waste facilities. Those went into effect, I think it was in just maybe it was January of this year. We'd been working on those for a long time. As it says, that's the first complete update and rewrite of Class 2 disposal well rules in 40 years. And additionally, let's see, just on a couple little points that are really good in there. As it says, no, for this is the Class 2 or surface facility, actually. No, these cannot be located within 750 feet of an occupied private dwelling or public building. It was 150 feet. Nearer than 500 feet from the boundary of the subject tract. Before, there was either nothing or 75 feet, depending if you're in an urban area. Can't be within the boundary of flood hazard area unless they meet these floodplain regulations. And this just scratches the tip of some of the things, but some of those distances are really important. So it really helps in terms of the location of those. Oh, and incidentally, I meant to start off with this, but I'll just throw it in here now since we're kind of talking about Class 2. I went over and talked to our UIC manager after Dale had brought up the Washington County stuff, just to make sure I understood it correctly. And the reason the applicant for the UIC injection well withdrew his application. So that's the reason the meeting was canceled, is they're going to apparently change their injection zone and rework their casing program. And then they'll send out a new public notice, which then if the locals, which I'm assuming they will, want a public meeting down there, we'll reschedule a public meeting. But when the applicant withdrew their application, there was no longer a discussion to have since there wasn't a pending valid application. So I imagine that'll circle around later this year, but right now they have not reapplied yet. Waste facilities, these rules govern the storage, recycling, treatment, processing of brine and other waste substances. Some of the citing criteria I just went over. There's permit requirements, bonding, insurance requirements, public notice process, water well sampling, enforcement procedures, reclamation and decommission procedures. Some of this was required before the rules, but we're definitely on stronger ground when we have it in the law and the rules versus a permit condition or a chief's order. When I was looking, I think I've just mentioned 5 or 6 rules that went into place. Rulemaking, if you've been involved in it, it's not a simple process, and there's a lot to it. So some of these we certainly been working on for 2 or 3 or more years. And finally, we're starting to see the fruit of all that work come into play with the spacing rules, the plugging rules, the well construction pad rules, the UIC rules, the waste facility rules, SIMOPS rules. It's just, there's a lot. So a lot of very good work has been done in the last few years, and it's all just kind of coming into place. So we're not done, but it's also good just sometimes to reflect back and see what has been accomplished. Orphan wells, there's currently a little over 1,000 wells in the orphan well program. But with the infrastructure bill, which put forth about $4 billion towards orphan well plugging, we basically told our field staff for November and December, shift gears, let's identify orphan wells. And so pretty much everyone's working on this and almost came up with 20,000 wells we could identify as documented orphan wells. And the infrastructure bill or the details in order to apply for that money had requirements and specifications on what a documented orphan well was. So you had to do certain things in order to actually count it. Now we knew we had a lot, but when you don't have money, it doesn't do a lot of good to go find 20,000 orphan wells when you can't begin to plug them, and a lot of them aren't really hurting anything at the moment. We always deal with the ones that are, but so this is good. And we're gonna probably become the division of orphan well here. But this just kind of shows a historical perspective of, you can see the number of wells in that were, or if you just focus on the numbers, those are the numbers of wells that were plugged. And then you can see the amount of money that we had down there encumbered. And basically up through 2017, it was about $1 million a year. And then it bumped up to 6 million. And then it was 13, 16 million. So correspondingly, of course, the number of wells that have been encumbered by contract and plugged has increased dramatically in the last few years. So that's obviously really a good thing. This is kind of interesting. We actually have a drone that does surveying, and it's equipped with a magnetometer, and it's flown and it identifies orphan wells. Most of these are buried below the ground, but it can sense like the steel casing. And then you can take that point and kind of go back and look at the old maps or put someone out in the field. And a lot of times the well may actually be out there. There might be an actual physical presence of it. So this way you can at least cover a lot of acreage, figure out where your kind of hot spots are, that's showing potential, casing in the ground, and then focus on those as opposed to having an inspector try to walk that field or something. So we do plan on flying more acres in this spring. So we do have, as you can see from that previous slide, in terms of the increase, we have one of the better funded well orphan programs in the country, $22 million a year. We talked how many we had plugged. Now we have expanded, and we're kind of cannibalizing ourselves because I just had a geologist in my section transfer to be a geologist in the orphan well section. And we have some of our field enforcement inspectors that become orphan well inspectors. So it's increasing a lot. And then we all have to scramble and find people for our sections. But it looks like, as it said, between the production that we get through the severance tax, and 40% of that money we get is devoted to the orphan well program. And then with the federal infrastructure money, we potentially could have $634 million to spend through 2035, which is, which, as it says, we'd be one of the top 2 funded states in the country. So that's partly why our program we're expanding, we're hiring people, we're doing all this to try to make sure we can position ourselves to use this money, because I know there are certain benchmarks. They're not going to just give you the $500 million right now. You have this much, and once you spend this much, then you can get more. But we do haven't, as we mentioned at the very offset of this talk, there was 100 years of oil and gas activity before there was really much regulation. And so there wasn't bonding, there wasn't really accountability. A lot of people produced the wells and walked away from them. So it's a legacy issue. And so we have a great opportunity to address a lot of it. And probably everyone, except maybe the person in Adams County, has orphan wells in their county. They're all over the state. So then switching gears here, just kind of looking at the industry activity for last year. And as you may know, we have basically two types of rigs that operate in the state. The double and triple rigs, or horizontal rigs, which drill the horizontal unconventional shale wells, and then vertical rigs that drill more of the conventional shallower vertical wells. And last year, our horizontal wells, do I have this on? Let me just see if I have this on the next slide or not. Yeah, I do. Okay. Let's see. So I'll get to it. So the red is the vertical wells and vertical rigs rather. You can kind of see we ended the year at 3 there and 10 for the horizontal. But basically you could see for the horizontal, we were above that 10 line almost once mid-February. The rig count was almost always above the 10 line. And that's what this next slide kind of shows. So there's the last 4 years. And last year, the rig count averaged 11, which is, compared to 6 in 2020. 2020, everything just stopped. The pandemic, just the shut-ins, the lockdowns, the readjusting to how do we do business, everything really shut down. Of course, there was less demand for oil and natural gas because we weren't driving anyplace. We weren't going anyplace. So you can see that dramatic decline from 2019 to 2020. But last year, we saw it almost doubled again. And this year, and actually even yesterday, the rig count was the same as it was a week ago, 13 rigs. So pretty much for the year, this year so far, we've been averaging 13 or even 14 rigs a week for horizontal. Verticals 2 or 3. And then just looking at 2021, these are new producing wells for the year. So you can see that Jefferson had the most producing wells last year with 52, Belmont 30, Harrison 29, Monroe 21, Guernsey 11, Carroll 4, Columbiana 2, Noble 1, and Muskingum 1. And then correspondingly, you can see the rig averages, and the top 4 counties averaged about 1.5 rigs a week. However, Belmont was over 3 rigs a week. So Belmont was a very active county last year. New in the Marcellus Shale, which generally when we talk about horizontal shale in Ohio, it's the Utica, Point Pleasant formations, but there is a shale named the Marcellus, and it's a couple 3,000 feet above the Utica, Point Pleasant, and it pretty much just goes into the Washington County, Monroe County part of the state. But in last year, there were 4 new producing wells for a total of 44 producing wells in the Marcellus. So not much. On the Utica, Point Pleasant side, there were 151 new producing wells. And at the end of 2021, there were 2,790 producing wells. And at the very end, I have the update for as of yesterday, and you'll see that number's even a lot higher. So we're going to take few minutes to look at oil production and natural gas production. We actually have, since 1876, we know the number of barrels that were produced by year. There was actually some production previous to that, which I've never been able to find a record on. But interesting enough, up until 2019 on the far top right of your slide, which shows like 27.6 million barrels produced. Before that, the previous high was 1896. Those were the Trenton oil wells up in northwestern Ohio around Findlay and Lyman, that area. So it's pretty crazy that up until a couple of years ago, the highest oil production in the state of Ohio was before the 1900s. But now we've topped that a couple times. So last year, I'll get into so then they're required to submit production by quarter. So the red circle just shows the last 4 quarters of last year. And you can see generally that line kind of going through the middle of those bars is the 4 million mark. So there were a couple quarters above 4 million, a couple just right below 4 million. The oil production for 2021 from just the horizontal shale was about a little over 16 million barrels. And this slide actually shows that there's 3 things going on in this slide. There's the lighter green, which is conventional oil. That's the oil that comes out of the vertical wells. And if you look at the far left in 2021, you can see when the horizontal shale play started, conventional oil was about 5 million barrels, and horizontal shale well was 46,326 barrels. So nothing. And that's what that middle bar is. That's your shale oil. And then the last dark green bar is you take your first 2 bars, add them together, and you get your 3rd bar. So you can see how quickly and dramatically it didn't take long. You know, by the time you're in 2014, the shale oil is almost 11 million barrels, and the vertical conventional oil was probably about 4 million. And then it just kind of took off after that. And you can see as you focus on that lower conventional oil bar from left to right, you can see how it continues to decline each year. If you look at 2021, it might be about 2.5 million barrels. And that's because every well that produces declines. It produces a little less this year than it did last year. There's just, it's called a decline curve. And then correspondingly, they're not drilling many vertical wells. So you're not replenishing that supply at the percentage that you're taking it. And then when you focus on the shale wells, shale drilling for oil dropped. 2019 was the highest point. It dropped to 21 million in 20 and 16.4 in 2021. But again, that's a reflection, or what that is it's a reflection of the drilling activity went farther to the east in the state, focusing on the natural gas, because the natural gas prices, the economics were better for natural gas than they were for oil. When I was working on, kind of behind, but I just finished the 2020 annual report for the division a couple weeks ago. And one thing in there, I scale, like, what was the lowest oil price in the year? What was the highest oil price in the year? And for 2020, in April of 2020, almost 2 years ago this time, it was 10 cents a barrel on one day. So, and then actually there was one day that was negative 35 cents, but I can't get my head around a negative number. And it's like, oh, am I paying you to take my oil? So I just went with the 10 cents. But to go from 10 cents 2 years ago to over right around $100 a barrel in 2 years, it's a lot of ups and downs, like Dale had mentioned earlier. Let's see. So that's the high point so the high production point, we saw that on the other slide, was in 2019 with over 27 million barrels produced. Then same kind of what we went through with natural gas. Now, natural gas, 52s as far back as we really have records of the volumes produced by year. And again, you can see the high point up until the shale was 1984, which was 186 billion cubic feet. And then it just declined. And again, you're seeing kind of that decline curve in conventional wells to a low of 73 billion cubic feet in 2021. So declined over half between the high point. And so again, without this horizontal shale play, you could see where Ohio's oil and gas industry was heading. And then the horizontal shale play hit. And in 2015, that one with all those numbers, that's actually trillion cubic feet. And there's 10, 100 billions in a trillion. So basically this 186, if you round that up to 200 billion cubic feet, what you have in 2015 is 5 times that. And then up to that peak in 2019, 2.6 trillion cubic feet. Just incredible amounts of natural gas being produced, nothing like it in our history at all. When again, that blue circle kind of shows the last 4 quarters of the 4 quarters of 2021. And that's that scale is 500 billion cubic feet, or another way to say that is 500 billion cubic feet. And you can see each quarter was in the mid 500 billion cubic feet. So again, I think it was about 2.2 trillion cubic feet was produced in 2021. And the highest point was the 3rd quarter of 2019, which almost 678 billion cubic feet were produced in 1 quarter. Remember that previous slide, the highest up to this shale play was 186 billion in a year. 1 quarter has almost over 3 times that much. Just to give you a scope of what we've been experiencing for the last several years here. Same scales, only natural gas on this. It shows the conventional and then the shale gas and then the totals. And that number represents the number for each bar. That's the actual shale gas number. So again, it wasn't even really in 2011 on the scale. It's so low, you can't even really make out the bar, but it didn't take long. Again, and in this case, 2013 was about even. 2014 just took off and then has just continued on since then. This is the blue column shows the actual natural gas production. The orange column shows total consumption of natural gas in the state of Ohio, and that's residential, commercial, total consumption. And you can see previous to the shale gas play, Ohio only produced about 10% of what we used. That's why we had pipelines coming from the Rocky Mountains to Ohio, the Rockies Express, bringing Western gas to Ohio. And there are pipelines coming from other places into the state. And I remember when I first figured this out, which would have been around 2015, when I saw for the first time in Ohio's history, we produced more natural gas than we used. And now you can see we're almost producing twice what we use in the state. And therefore, a lot of it is going elsewhere. We're actually exporting natural gas out of the state because we have, we're producing so much. We produce more than we actually use. Now, natural gas is complicated. I'm sure we still have some contracts in the state coming in from the West, because a lot of these things are long-term sorts of things. But again, it just shows you on another perspective the impact of the natural gas production in Ohio. This slide here, it's regarding reserves, and it kind of parallels a couple of those other slides in terms of seeing the decline. Reserves just indicate what we can expect to produce in the future. And that line was going south. And now, and that line down there was, let's see, what would that have been? 10 billion cubic feet. So it was less than that. And now, it's over 30,000 billion cubic feet. So again, the reserves have increased dramatically as natural gas has been discovered in the shale. Most of you know this, it's just a reminder that we do post the quarterly production, which only horizontal is required to report quarterly. The vertical is only once a year, but you can go on our website, you can download all this information that I've made into these little charts. It's all available, and we have a lot of people that do use it. This cartoon just shows, a general depiction of how the production areas in Ohio. To the east, the red is the dry gas. Then you have wet gas and volatile oil in the middle, and then you have oil. And as I mentioned, the last couple of years, the majority of the drilling has just been focused over here in Belmont and Jefferson, especially those two, and the rig counts, and a little bit Monroe, but the rig counts kind of went along with what we saw there. Let's see, those are kind of oil area. Those are Guernsey and Harrison are producing more of the oil and wet gas. And so this slide takes the fourth quarter production, which we just got finalized last week. So this is a very recent slide. So I took the fourth quarter production and just sorted it from which well produced the greatest amount of oil in the fourth quarter of 2020, and took the top 20 wells. And you can see in the yellow are wells in Harrison, the green are wells in Guernsey County. And you can see that's why those two circles were on that previous slide, because that's really where the production activity is coming from. But you can see set one well in Harrison County produce 77,000 barrels in a quarter. And then there's also a fair amount of natural gas with it too. So our top 20 went from 77,000 down to 39,000. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. This was 2020. Okay, I left that in there. That's right, it was a comparison. So everything I just said, think 2020, because this is what it looked like in 2020. 10 wells in Guernsey, 9 wells in Harrison, 77,000. That's right, I decided to do that. So then this is 2021. This is the one that's hot off the press. So, okay, so there were 8 wells in Guernsey, 7 in Harrison, and 5 in Carroll. So the previous slide, let me go back there and look. Okay, that last well on the previous slide was Carroll County. So there was 1 well in 2020 in Carroll. Now there's 5. So it bounced its way out a little bit. But look at the top well. So it switched a little bit. Before it was Harrison. Now it's Guernsey, the top 4 wells. And look, the top well is 121,000 barrels, whereas the previous quarter a year ago was 77. And so there were actually 4 wells higher than 77. So it's just interesting, it's just like, you can play around with these a lot of different ways, but it's just kind of giving you a snapshot of some tremendous production that's going on in the state. So then this is all of 2021. So now all 4 quarters combined, and then I did the largest to smallest for the top 20 wells. And you can see on this one that they were either in Harrison or Guernsey County. And so the greatest one well produced 239,000, almost 240,000 barrels of oil in a year, just one well, down to 128,000 for the top 20 wells. Then this just going to flip over to the dry gas side, and Belmont and Jefferson tend to be the counties that produce, or the greater producers. So this is, now that I have my head on, this is 2020 fourth quarter, and you can see that there were 13 wells in Belmont, 5 in Jefferson, and then overall, though I didn't show you all the wells, there were 43 wells over 2 billion cubic feet. And the top well here was 2.9 billion cubic feet. Then when we go to 2021, look at that. There were 18 wells in Jefferson, 2 in Monroe. So we'll just go back, going back to 2020. So there's 2020, 13 in Belmont, 5 in Jefferson. Now, a year later, same quarter, with the exception of 2 Monroe wells, it's all Jefferson County. And look, the top, well, Monroe actually has the top well at 6.5 billion cubic feet for just the fourth quarter. And then there were 44 wells over 2 billion. So that's actually interesting. The number of wells over 2 billion cubic feet didn't change a lot, but the focus right now is just shows all this recent Jefferson County drilling, which of any of the counties would probably be the most recent. And then again, just taking the whole year, summing everything up, and then there's a little more diverse there. There were 10 wells in Belmont, 5 in Jefferson, 3 in Monroe, and 2 in Harrison. So the top well in Belmont there was 9.5 billion cubic feet. Let's see. So then this, everything that was produced for the year 2021 in horizontal shale production, I've just taken every county, and as you can see, there's 4 columns: wells, oil total, gas total, and brine total. And then what I've done is I've just done some little highlighting. So this slide shows you which counties had the most of those categories. You can see that Belmont has the highest number of producing wells. Guernsey has the greatest oil production. Belmont has the greatest natural gas and brine. And I don't need to read these, you can see them, but this, just the blue shows you who was second. The green shows which counties were third. And then finally, I just threw them all together. So there's a snapshot of all activity and by those wells, oil, gas, and brine. Finally, this is just a couple slides left. This is a slide that you're regularly familiar with. And I just update this on a weekly basis. And I just did, this is actually as of the end of last week. So I just actually finished this slide early this morning. What it shows is there's been almost 3,600 permits issued. Of those, 3,058 wells have been drilled. And of those, 2,849 are currently in production. And they're ordered by the last slide that we just looked at. In this slide, it's ordered by the number of permits issued. So you have to kind of look at the wells drilled. For instance, sometimes it might flip around a little bit, but generally the numbers seem to go pretty descendingly according to permit. Same bottom lines, but now these are the top 10 operators in the state, which generally account for about in the mid 80s to 90% of all the activity that's done. And EAP or Encino is they bought Chesapeake's wells. And so they're the most, they have the most permits, they have the most wells drilled, they have the most wells in production, again, because they really bought Chesapeake. Ascent is second. Now Ascent's probably been the most active here for the last year or two. And then you can kind of see the rest of them. Chesapeake, I need to figure this out. Chesapeake's on there because there were 111 permits in their name. I think these three were just dry or lost holes. I probably should actually take Chesapeake off because they're gone. The permits are under their name. Now that I'm looking at this, I think I probably will just start not putting them on the top 10 because they're gone. And those are just permits that they at one time have obtained but never drilled. And probably in some of those cases, EAPs come back and gotten those permits. And this is our last slide. These are all the companies that have either obtained a horizontal shale permit or bought horizontal shale wells. And you can see there's a lot of companies in gray that have come and gone. And then I was looking at it, and the yellow are current, active, unconventional operators. In other words, operators that came into the state to drill horizontal shale wells. And a lot of those companies that were in gray now fit into this category. But for instance, up near the top, there's British Petroleum America, and they had not a lot. They had some wells, and they ended up deciding they weren't going to land in Ohio, so they left. Shell, which is that SWEPI at the bottom, that's Shell, they got one permit and decided they weren't going to do it. So at the beginning, it's kind of the Wild West. Everyone's kind of getting a position. Everyone's trying to figure it out. And a lot of these companies have sorted it out and decided they're just not staying here, and they sold their wells. But then the companies in green, and I know we've talked about this over the years, and it's starting to manifest itself more and more, are companies that are really conventional oil and gas operators in the state, but have purchased and or drilled horizontal shale wells like Artex up there near the top. Long time conventional oil and gas operator in the state with hundreds of wells. Well, they actually bought Anadarko's wells, which are like 3 lines above them, and then subsequently have drilled 2 of their own and plan to do more in the future. Other companies like GeoPetro in the middle, they've just bought, I forget whose wells they bought, but they just bought those wells and are just producing them. So we're starting to see some of the landscape shift as some of the conventional operators are buying some horizontal wells and starting to do something there. That concludes what I had to say. I don't know if there's any questions or not.
Hey, thank you, Mike. I'm sure there's plenty of questions. I'd like to start us off with a question. The brine being produced, like where are most of these class 2 injection wells found as far as county? Like I know produced in Belmont, according to this graph, but like where is it being taken to? Just, I mean, if you can, or like maybe a couple counties that are collecting the brine water and have these class 2 injection wells in place.
That's a great question. I don't know. And I'm just thinking, kind of made a note that it'd been nice to actually put a map of the class 2 injection wells, where they're located by county, and even which wells are taking the most water, because I don't know that off the top of my head. I know that Belmont does. Belmont has some, Washington has some. Then I think you get a little more west and north. But yeah, that's a good question, Dan. I don't know offhand where all of it's going. And some of that brine, and I can't give you the actual percentage, but some of that brine being produced is being recycled and reused too. So it's not all totally being injected. There's a certain amount that they are able to recycle and reuse. And I think some of that goes to maybe one of the waste facilities where they can recycle. So it's probably going in kind of to a waste facility for treatment, for recycling, reuse, and an injection. But there's certainly, when you look at that bottom line number, almost 30 million barrels of brine, there is a lot of brine being produced.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
And maybe, I can follow up, and maybe I could just have a quick update, try to do a quick update in April on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of counties that are going to see that movement are going to get questions on that. Just like another quick question that I was thinking of, when you had the state consuming the natural gas, the Ohio consumption, do you think that's going to go up with increased natural gas power plants? Go up significantly?
Getting back to it. So this slide here. So
yeah.
The question is, does the orange consumption bar, will that go up high? Because when you look at the last 4 years there, it stayed, and that number, well, you can see actually it's about 1 trillion. That line with those last 4 bars is about 1 trillion cubic feet. So it's a little, that's probably like 1.2 trillion maybe. So it's stayed very consistent for the last 4 years. I don't know. I think that's a good assumption that we would see it go up some as the coal plants go out and the natural gas plants go in, it'd be interesting to look at that next year, because a lot of that transition has just taken place in the last couple of years. So it may be a little too soon to, I don't know, but it could partly, I guess in my mind, I'm not sure exactly. That actually has probably been going on. It could be going on since 2018. So maybe what we are seeing is when that consumption went from slightly below 1 trillion cubic feet to more like 1.2 or 3 trillion feet, that could be a reflection of some of that going in that direction. It's not like we're really building a lot of factories right now to use natural gas. So I don't know if I can figure that out or not, but that might be actually 2018. That may be a reflection of that.
Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
Yeah, Mike, I've got a question too. I know that recently Biden came out and said that we were going to try to help Europe wean itself from Russian energy sources. And one of the sources that he said that we could provide more of is natural gas. Now, I know this is a real question. We have no idea. It'd be great to have a crystal ball, but what are your thoughts on that? And do you see then that Ohio natural gas production and export might increase as a result?
Nothing's going to happen. You can't turn on a dime in this industry. And everyone with these prices, rig availability, just everything there's just not employment, employees. You can't just all of a sudden, oh, we're going to ramp up and do it. I think things are ramping up in the sense that we're issuing more permits this year so far than we did last year, and we issued more last year than we did the year before. So things are definitely moving up. That rig count of 13 or 14 weekly as opposed to 7 or 8. And so things are definitely increasing. It gets kind of dicey in terms of contracts. Some of this gas is already committed to different places. So I don't know. And then also the uncertainty for the industry is, will these prices, how long will these prices continue? Now, my understanding is they're probably going to be good at some high level through the end of the year, because this isn't going to go away real quickly.
Hey, Richard, this is Margie Snow.
Excuse me?
I think Richard was getting a phone call.
Oh, okay. There's a voice. So I think we're going to see an active year. How much that can really go in the directions you're asking about, I don't know.
Myra, I could probably help answer that, because I can tell you there are 5 liquefied LNG terminals on the eastern seaboard. All of them are at full capacity. You're going to have to expand that infrastructure. That's another 60 to 72 months out. And so you're not going to see any uptick with regard to that. It's nice to talk about it and different things, but Mike is correct. When you take a look at the infrastructure, how much of this infrastructure is right now at full capacity, what it would take to expand it, and basically will the market still be there once the $1 billion investment is done? That's the guess. And that's the way this has been in this industry for a century. You just don't turn on the tap and go. That's the same with electricity. That's the same with natural gas. That's the same with oil. It's interesting that the companies involved with this are always on the edge of bankruptcy or mass profit. And it all depends on how much things are geared up. We have politicians who are all talking about gearing this up, and we can send this and we can do that with the Russians and that. The answer is, in the most robust plans going forward, it's 72 months before you can see making a dent in it. So welcome to the industry.
Dale, I remember you were talking about those storage caverns. I guess that was kind of an idea when the prices were low. I wouldn't suspect like they would be filling those up right now.
Well, they are, but then again, Mike is correct. It's amazing how much forward contracting is done at certain price levels. I tell you, happiness is a deep in the money call or put right now with regard to this. And like you say, storage will still be there. It's always part of the particular process. Until very, very recently, until about 2015 or whatever, gas was considered basically a domestic commodity, and you saw very little impact on international events impacting it here in the United States. But now it's fully traded, and like you say, the prices and different things in Europe are going to impact the value of our gas here, but getting it to Europe to meet those particular markets is still very much a challenge. And so we'll see what happens.
One thing I just thought about is it would have been good to have a slide in there, but our unitizations have continued to increase. That's the process where they can't get 100% of a drilling unit, 100% leased of a drilling unit. And we're having unitization hearings weekly, sometimes 2 days a week, and we always have a morning and an afternoon hearing. So we're having 2 to 4 unitization applications a week. Probably not quite 52 weeks in the air because of holidays or whatever, but probably like 45 or 46. And I think we're scheduled out for the next 3 or 4 months right now. And part of it's a reflection of drilling units that proposed drilling units that are coming in are 1,000 acres, 2 or 3 wells on them, and they just are unable to get 100% of 1,000 acres leased. And so that also, we do issue some. I issued 6 yesterday that were fine. Well, I could qualify that, but we do see some units that come through 100%, but a lot of them do not. And so now you have to apply for a unitization. You have to go to a hearing. We, within 30 to 60 days, would either approve it or deny it. So there's a point in time there. Then there's a point, another 30 days before the order becomes effective, before they can even apply. So a lot of what they're doing now, it's going to be probably 6 months before they could even apply for a drilling permit. And then there's probably another 3 to 6 months when they drill it, infrastructure, get it into production. So because a lot of what's being done today is based on a unitization order, you're looking at pretty much a year. Now, yeah, so.
Yeah, Mike's very much, and I'm gonna support Mike in building upon what he has said just briefly. That's one of the things we need to get across to the folks, consumers, farmers, government leaders. It's amazing how everybody has been yelling and screaming that Biden, and I'm not necessarily being political here, but Biden shut down basically the energy industry. And now you're finding out oil and gas has had 9,000 federal permits on federal ground across the continent of North America for a number of years. The question is, why aren't they drilling? Number one. Number two, people are yelling and screaming that he basically shut down the Keystone XL pipeline. What people don't realize is that Keystone is actually a pipeline system. There's been 5 branches going to the same locations as Keystone XL, and they've been doing that for the last 4 to 5 years. Keystone XL was shut down because of environmental constraints and things. Trump had the ability basically to shut it down or whatever, but he let it flow with regard to that. There's a number of avenues and different things, but people are finding out that you don't automatically make a decision today in impact reduction and helping folks understand the market fundamentals, helping them understand how the process flow goes through here, helping them understand how things are impacted with regard to this is incredibly huge. So, but I've said my piece.
I do think that for some of these long-term vertical wells or the pump jack wells that we see out in the fields, I do think for those operators, they're going to start pumping those wells. Some of those wells, when you're only getting 10 cents, 20 or 10 cents to 20 bucks a barrel, no, it would cost you money. But my guess is there's a lot of old time conventional wells that are, especially that produce oil, that are being pumped now. So the landowners are going to get a little royalty bonus check. Some of those wells are going to get reactivated. So the price in a very small scale is good for a lot of our old time kind of historic, not very well producing wells.
Yeah, Mike's right. Because I tell you, if you talk to the old time producers up through the new guys in vertical and horizontal drilling development, the target is you need to have oil sustained at $70 a barrel before you start making money. And it's interesting because we're talking here at oil well above that. The question is for many of these guys before they commit to any production activity is how long is it going to be like that? If it's a series of days, months, or years is going to determine what my investment is going to be in equipment, labor, infrastructure, and drilling. If it's long and sustained, yes, I'm going to do it. But as soon as it gets down but below a certain level, I'm going to shut down too. And we've already seen that happen in this oil patch over the last number of years. And Mike's data goes to show some of that.
All right. Any other questions for Mike? Hey, Mike, thank you very much for a wonderful update. Very
Oh,
informative.
sure. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Okay.